Welcome. Come in, close the door, get comfortable, and listen closely. There is a corner of you no one has ever seen. Not your partner, not your parents, not even you fully. A place that sometimes shows up during sleepless nights when you can no longer pretend everything is fine. That place where you're not strong, not perfect, not exemplary, just human, hurting, tired, real. You were taught to hide it. They told you it was your shadow, that we don't talk about it, that we shouldn't show it, that it must be buried beneath phrases like, you have to move on, don't complain, just think positive. And you tried. You tried to be light without facing your darkness. You tried to be happy without touching your sadness. You tried to be loved without revealing what hurt you the most. And here you are, with a shining side that everyone sees, and with another side, the deepest one, that no one knows, but that screams in silence every time you smile without meaning it. That side that sabotages your relationships, that wakes up with anxiety, that eats out of fear, that loves out of need, that sleeps with guilt, that side of you that isn't bad or broken or weak. It's just waiting to be seen. This audiobook is for that side, for that part of you that never had permission to exist. Because you didn't come into this world to be perfect. You came to be free, and there is no freedom without embracing what you've hidden your whole life. Maybe you're wondering, why would I want to look at what hurts? Why open the door to what I've spent years avoiding? And the answer is simple, because what you don't face controls you. What you deny becomes your destiny. What you repress turns into reaction. Every outburst of anger, every fear disguised as caution, every pattern you keep repeating in relationships without knowing why, they're not mistakes. They're messages, signs that something within you is longing to be acknowledged, loved, embraced, not fixed, not erased, not overcome, just embraced. If you've ever felt out of place, if you've ever compared yourself to filtered lives on social media, if you've ever pretended to be okay while something inside you was falling apart, this book is for you. Because there comes a moment in life when you get tired of performing, not on stage, in life. You get tired of smiling so you don't make others uncomfortable, of being strong so you don't worry anyone, of saying you're fine just because explaining you're not would be too much. And then something happens, something small, silent, transformative, like a crack in a wall that always seemed solid. But your pain is not weakness, it's proof that you're alive. And if you're alive, then you still have time to rewrite the script. Get ready to strip down without taking your clothes off, to cry without shame, to laugh in the middle of a wound, to question everything without losing yourself. And most of all, get ready to return. Return to yourself, not to the version the world accepts, to the version your soul has been waiting for all along. This is the beginning of a journey, and you won't walk it alone. The voice that speaks to you in these pages isn't here to teach you. It's here to remind you of what you already know, but had forgotten. Your shadow isn't bad, and it isn't your enemy. It is the doorway to your truest light. Chapter 1. What you hid to survive is now asking to be born. In a corner of the world where few ever look, something happened that's worth remembering. There was a man named Romero, whom everyone knew as the life of the party. If you saw him, he always wore a smile as bright as the flash of the photos he loved to post on Instagram. To the outside world, Romero was the very definition of success, joy and abundance, exotic trips, fancy dinners, influential friends. Everything seemed so perfect that if someone had to cast the face of happiness in an advertising campaign, Romero would have been the undisputed star. But on a random Tuesday, one of those days where no one expects a miracle or a tragedy, Romero lost his phone. The battery died, and to top it off, he'd left his charger at home. At first, nothing really happened. He felt a little uncomfortable, like someone heading out into a cloudy day without an umbrella. But as the hours passed, A strange sensation began to creep into his chest, a quiet, unnamed anxiety that started to grow. It was as if someone had suddenly cut the umbilical cord that tethered him to the world, to his identity, to his steady stream of validation. Who am I when no one's watching? Romero wondered in a moment of uncomfortable clarity, staring at his reflection in the window of a bakery. And for the first time in a very long while, he felt afraid. Not afraid of losing his phone or even his followers, but afraid of realizing that without that constant connection to the outside world, he had no idea who he really was. That's where the shadow was, the one he had never dared to see, the one hiding behind every perfect smile, every carefully edited story, every post that got thousands of likes. The shadow that whispered to him every time he found himself alone. What if they discover who you really are? What if you're not all that interesting without filters and captions? Romero is not so different from you or me. We all carry a version of that shadow, tucked away in a quiet corner of our minds. It's the fear of not fitting in, the terror of being exposed, the silent anxiety of feeling like an imposter in our own lives. The shadow emerges when we stop looking outward and, in the discomfort of solitude, hear our own voice for the first time. Do you know what Romero did that day? He sat on a park bench. No Valencia filter, no perfect angles, no clever captions. He just breathed. He listened to the pigeons, watched children playing, noticed how the clouds drifted slowly across the sky, completely unaware of his digital distress. And in that moment, he realized something powerful. He had been searching outside for something that could only be found within. Romero discovered that behind his shadow, behind his fear of rejection and disapproval, was the very light he had spent his life seeking. Because when you dare to look your shadow in the eye, without running, without sugarcoating, without hiding it behind a screen, something extraordinary happens. You start to reclaim your power. And it was right there in that park, in the most uncomfortable and beautiful silence he had ever known, that Romero felt something close to real peace. The kind of peace that doesn't need external approval, that doesn't vanish when the battery dies or the screen goes dark. Because the shadow isn't bad or dangerous or something to be erased. It is simply everything you haven't allowed yourself to see, feel, or accept. It's that dark corner that, when illuminated with honesty, reveals the true beauty of being human, imperfect, vulnerable, and real. The next day, when he got his phone back, Romero did something he had never done before. He didn't post anything. And curiously, he didn't feel the need to. Because now, for the first time, he knew that his value wasn't defined by his image or popularity, but by something much deeper. His ability to be with himself, in silence, in stillness, in fullness. What happened to Romero, though it might not look like it, has also happened to you, or it will. Because we all, at some point, live through a random Tuesday where we lose our connection to the outside world and come face to face with our shadow. And when that moment comes, remember, you're not losing anything. On the contrary, you're recovering something sacred, the chance to really know yourself, the freedom to be authentic, unapologetic, unfiltered, and unafraid. Think about it. No one is born pretending. A baby doesn't apologize for crying, doesn't worry about making too much noise, doesn't say sorry for needing love. It arrives in the world whole, vulnerable, and fully present, as if saying, "This is me, and that should be enough." And then the education begins. We're not just talking about school. We're talking about stares, silences, corrections. Those quiet phrases that don't sound like knives but still teach you to shrink. Don't cry. Be strong. We don't say that. We don't do that. We don't feel that. And so, little by little, we start burying parts of ourselves like emotional garbage. Not because they were wrong, but because they made others uncomfortable. That's where the shadow is born. Not as something evil, but as a locked room where you store everything no one knew how to hold: your sadness, your anger, your sensitivity, your intuition, your strangeness, your questions, your intensity. And you didn't do it out of malice. You did it out of love, to belong, to survive, to not be the only one alone at recess or ignored at the dinner table. You did it with a kind of primal emotional intelligence, because the instinct to be accepted is stronger than the desire to be yourself. Years later, that same shadow starts to make noise, in the form of anxiety, addictions, decisions you can't explain. Elegant self-sabotage disguised as responsibility, and you don't know why. Until one day, in front of the mirror, or in the middle of a crisis, something inside you says, "I don't want to keep hiding anymore." And that's where this book begins. Not with answers, but with a mirror. A mirror that doesn't judge, that doesn't ask you to be better. It simply says, look at yourself without the costume. That costume is heavy, and it's not that wearing it was wrong. It was necessary at times. But you're no longer in that jungle. You no longer need camouflage to avoid being wounded. What you need now is air, so you can be born. Yes, born again. Because most people aren't tired of life. They're tired of living as someone else, and they never realized it. They just felt an exhaustion that no vacation could cure. That's what the shadow does when it grows too large. It drains your energy to simply exist. You're not sad because of what happened. You're sad because you're still carrying the version of yourself you built to please others. It's like living in a house full of locked rooms. You only use the dining room and the bathroom, and one day, by accident, you open a door and discover a space filled with light, art, windows, and dust. Because you forgot it was there. Because you closed it so it wouldn't make anyone uncomfortable. And the question is, how much longer will you keep paying rent in a house where you only live halfway? Sometimes, to awaken, you don't need a trauma. You just need unfiltered honesty, the kind that comes when you're fed up with your own script. A famous actress, no names, but she has more Oscars than days to wear gowns, once admitted in an interview that she had been acting off-camera too. Her character was kind, graceful, brilliant, spiritual, always smiling, always perfect. But her therapist, with surgical precision, asked her, "And when do you take a break from being so enlightened?" The shadow applauded from within. Because even on the spiritual path, we put on costumes. We dress up as gurus, as zen, as balanced beings. We cloak ourselves in pretty phrases to avoid saying what we truly feel. I'm scared. I feel lost. I'm exhausted from pretending I'm okay. And no, you don't have to shout it on social media or write it on a coffee mug. You just have to stop betraying it inside yourself. Because your shadow is not the enemy. It's the part of you that was left waiting to be accepted. And now, after so many years locked away, it's asking to be born. There comes a moment in every human life when you start to suspect that you're not what you seem, not what you seem to others, but what you seem to yourself. A kind of crack opens between what you do and what you feel, between what you say and what you truly meant to say. Sometimes it happens after a crisis, sometimes in a supermarket aisle, sometimes quietly as you look out a window and ask yourself, this life I'm living, is it really me? That crack is not weakness. It's a threshold, a passage between the version you built to survive and the truth you've kept hidden just to avoid being alone. Because yes, what we fear most is not being rejected by the world. It's being rejected by those who taught us not to fully reveal ourselves. And within that dilemma lies one of the most common wounds of the soul, not knowing how to be yourself without feeling guilty. Do you know why so many people feel lost? Not because they lack direction, but because they've been taught not to trust their own compass. The shadow isn't only what you hide, it's also the truth you silence for fear of standing out. And for many, standing out is worse than suffering. A young musician I met at a retreat once told me, "I know I'm good, but only if I play what people expect of me. I asked him what happens if he plays what he wants. He looked down, ashamed, and said, I feel weird. And that's when I understood everything. The shadow wasn't telling him he couldn't shine. It was telling him that shining with his own melody was dangerous, because somewhere in his childhood, that melody had been met with ridicule, or indifference, or the quiet sting of, that's useless. And so we begin to leave pieces of ourselves behind, as if they were design flaws. We start taming the way we speak, the way we dress, the way we think and create, until we become so polished, so proper, that we forget how to laugh freely. And do you know what's most cruel about all of this? That often, this adapted version of you gets rewarded, applauded. It earns you success, admiration, approval. Life goes well for you. But somewhere deep inside, something feels empty, because you know that the one being celebrated isn't really you. It's a version optimized to fit in. It's like handing flowers to a mannequin that bears your name. And inside, something starts to wither. This doesn't mean everything you learned was wrong. Many of the things you adopted were useful. The problem begins when you no longer know where the borrowed ends and your truth begins. It's like wearing a hand-me-down jacket that once saved you from the cold, but now it's too tight, and you keep wearing it, not because you like it, but because it's all you have. But you are not a garment. You are a living body, a consciousness that evolves, that mutates, that needs emotional freedom to breathe. And this is where the shadow comes in. The shadow doesn't disappear just because you refuse to look at it. You know it's there because your body trembles when someone brings up something you don't want to remember, or because you overreact to things that shouldn't hurt that much, or because you keep repeating patterns you despise but can't seem to break. And no, you're not broken. There are just parts of you that haven't been acknowledged. They're not asking for justice. They're asking for presence. They're not asking for therapy. They're asking for permission. The shadow can be subtle. Sometimes it's the sarcastic comment you make when someone says something kind. Sometimes it's your discomfort when receiving a compliment. Sometimes it's the need to always be right. Sometimes it's the exaggerated laugh at gatherings when, deep down, you just want to leave. I once met a woman who worked in presidential protocol, poised, brilliant, diplomatic, the queen of self-control. But one day, in an intimate conversation, she said, I don't remember the last time I cried over something that truly mattered to me. And in that moment, without knowing it, she named her shadow, a grief so old it had forgotten how to ask for help. That's not weakness. That's history, a story that was never told, one that was archived deep in the consciousness because it was too much, too intense, too embarrassing, too honest. And what is too much for others is sometimes exactly what you needed to live. But to see that, you have to silence the noise of the character. You have to find the courage to say, this version of me saved me, but it no longer serves me. Not out of rejection, but as a step forward. And no, it doesn't require a dramatic scene. You don't have to quit everything or spark a revolution on Instagram. Sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply daring to whisper, what if I am more than this? That thought alone is a portal, a glowing crack in the mask. Because what you hid to survive didn't disappear. It just went to sleep. And now it's breathing louder. It's saying, thank you for protecting me, but now I want to live. There's a refined lie we've all told at some point. I don't care what others think. It's a phrase that sounds bold, looks great on t-shirts, and goes viral on social media. But if you look closely, it almost always trembles from within, because it's not entirely true. Even if we've read every book about self-love, even if we know that external validation isn't everything, there's still a part of us that measures our worth through someone else's eyes. And do you know which part that is? The one that was never recognized. The one that learned its existence depended on being seen favorably. The shadow doesn't just hold your traumas, it holds your uncelebrated talents. The creativity you were told was useless, the tenderness that was mistaken for weakness, the sensitivity that was mocked, the voice you silenced because someone else spoke louder. And all that material, everything you've been hiding, still longs to be expressed, not to prove anything, but because it is its nature, because you didn't come here to become someone. You came to remember who you were before you started hiding. Sometimes the shadow doesn't show up as dramatic darkness. It shows up as overcorrectness, as emotional rigidity, as the need to control everything so nothing goes wrong, as that resistance to improvise, to play, to make mistakes in public, to let yourself be seen without a filter. A man in his 40s, father, entrepreneur, well-dressed, outwardly successful, once confessed at a dinner, "I can't remember the last time I did something without thinking about how others would see me." And even though everyone laughed kindly, something about that phrase left a hush in the air, because everyone knew it was true, because in their own way, they all understood. That man wasn't suffering from a lack of money, love, or opportunity. He was suffering because he had built an identity so solid, he no longer knew how to step outside of it. And that, brother, is one of the most common ways to live in the shadow, when you no longer know how to let go of the version of yourself that works, but doesn't resonate. Some people have spent years being the one who always listens, the funny one, the fixer, the one who never gets angry. And it's not that they're fake, it's that those roles once protected their emotional life. But over time, they became a beautifully decorated prison, because the shadow is not just what hurts you, it's also what you never allowed to shine. Sometimes people feel like something in their life isn't flowing and they blame it on external causes. "I'm just unlucky," they say. "People don't take me seriously," or "there's always something missing." But what's really missing is space, the kind of space where you can just be without performing. What most people don't realize is how much energy it takes to keep up the act. That's why so many are exhausted, not from work or responsibilities, but from pretending. Pretending is far more tiring than sadness. Some days, your shadow doesn't scream. It simply whispers, "Don't perform today." And if you don't listen, your body steps in. Fatigue arrives, anxiety without a name. You go looking for solutions outside, but what your soul is asking is very simple. Can I be myself for a while without having to explain it? That in itself is light. That small act of permission is already sacred. But of course, giving yourself that permission is terrifying, because the system doesn't reward authenticity. It rewards efficiency, image, productivity. Yet you were never made to be a human algorithm. You were made to vibrate. I once read the story of a little girl who painted violet suns and flying trees. Her teacher, with the best intentions, told her, "That's not how things are. That's not how you paint." The girl smiled, but she never painted again. What she received wasn't just a correction. It was a reminder that being different makes others uncomfortable. And the saddest thing is, many adults still live that way. They keep painting what's expected. They keep coloring within the lines of what's socially acceptable, and they wonder why they don't feel alive. Have you felt that way? Like everything you do is technically correct, but inside there's no fire, as if your life has structure, but no breath. That's what it feels like when your shadow is silenced. And no, you don't need to become an artist or run wild or fly off to India. It's something much simpler, more intimate, more courageous. It's asking yourself each morning, does what I'm about to do truly represent me? Or is it just what I've learned to do to be accepted? Because anything that doesn't resonate with you will wear you out, and everything that is truly yours will nourish you. It's that simple. It's that powerful. There is a type of shadow that doesn't even look like a shadow. It's the one carried by those who have everything under control, those who are always fine, even when they're not, Those who help everyone but don't know how to ask for a hug without turning it into a joke. It's a refined shadow, socially praised, admired even. But it weighs heavy, because the shadow isn't only what you hide, it's also what you overplay to avoid being seen. And the world is full of actors without a stage, people who perform their roles so well, they've forgotten the original script. The script of the little boy who just wanted to dance without being called weird. The little girl who wanted to scream out her rage without being told she was ugly. The teenager who cried watching movies and hid it just to avoid being left alone. The problem isn't that we acted. Sometimes acting is what saved us. The problem is that many people are still on stage, even after the lights have gone out. Do you know why the shadow feels like something you drag behind you? Because it's not really yours, or not entirely. It's made of expectations you inherited, of phrases you believed when you were 6 years old, of standards you never questioned, of definitions of success that don't actually reflect who you are. Some people think their true calling is medicine, until they realize they were just repeating their family's legacy. Others believe their purpose is to help others, until they see they've never learned to help themselves. Some are convinced they love being in control, until they let go for a second and breathe deeper than ever before. Sometimes, what defines you isn't what you are, but what you were taught never to question. A woman in her late 60s once told me, "I don't even know if I like soup. I've eaten it my whole life because that's just how it was in my house." She said it with a smile, but her eyes told a deeper story. She was talking about soup, but also about her marriage, her career, her way of living. That's where the shadow lives, in the questions we avoid asking for fear of unraveling everything we've built. In the preferences we assume are ours but never chose freely. In the roles we play like a script, even when they no longer fit. Yes, asking those questions is scary, because you might discover that parts of your life are held up by emotional habits, not true desire. And yes, that hurts, but it also liberates. Because when you begin to see what no longer resonates, things begin to fall into place. Not everything falls apart, only what was being held together by the strain of pretending. And you don't need a revolution. You don't need to change your name. You don't have to move to a cabin in Iceland. Sometimes all it takes is one gesture, one different conversation, one no you've never dared to say, one yes you've postponed out of fear you weren't enough. There's something beautiful about beginning to disobey gently, about refusing to repeat inherited lines, about choosing words that truly represent you, about not laughing when you don't feel like it, about not explaining your sadness, about not performing. That too is light, because the shadow doesn't disappear through force. It integrates through presence, and to integrate it, you need space, silence, breath, and a little courage to tell yourself the truth, even if it doesn't sound pretty. And do you know what's most beautiful? That when you begin to speak from that place, from what truly vibrates in you, something inside relaxes, softens, aligns, not because life is easier, but because you no longer waste energy hiding from yourself. And that energy is the one you will use to begin again, not from scratch, but from the place that has always been there, waiting to be recognized. There are people who wake up every day without realizing they're acting. They brush their teeth with their character already on. They say good morning to the mirror without telling themselves the truth. They step out into a routine they never chose, and then wonder why they feel no spark. The answer isn't in the coffee. It's in a soul that's been faking excitement for years. There's a kind of shadow that's hardest to detect, the one dressed in success. Because not everything that shines has light. Sometimes it just has good emotional marketing. You were taught that if you had financial stability, a good-looking partner, a smiling profile picture, and a busy schedule, then you must be doing well. That if you lacked nothing, you had no right to feel like something was missing. So you swallowed the discomfort. You filtered it and called it grown-up stress. But inside, something kept stirring, something that wouldn't stay quiet with yoga or affirmations or green juice. And it's not that those things don't help. It's just that a part of you doesn't need wellness. It needs truth. And truth, when it comes, isn't always pretty, but at least it breathes. The shadow often hides behind efficiency, productivity, the polite smile of someone who doesn't want to cause trouble, the silence of someone who'd rather not make waves. But if your shadow could speak, sometimes it wouldn't give you a profound message. Sometimes it would just say, "I'm tired of being so functional." Once, in a writing workshop, a woman said, "I have a shadow that showers, puts on makeup, and replies to emails on time." Everyone laughed, but her words were a perfect X-ray of the modern epidemic. People operating flawlessly on autopilot. People who learned to be useful just so they wouldn't be invisible. People who would rather not rock the boat, even if they're drowning inside. Can you see how absurd it is? There are people who think they're failing because they can't maintain a life they never even wanted. Some feel guilty for not reaching a goal that was never theirs. Others push themselves every day to fit into a cage they didn't build, but decorated with quotes from Pinterest. And it's not that achievements are bad. The problem is, if your achievements are built on the suppression of your essence, success becomes luxurious anxiety. The shadow doesn't always want to scream. Sometimes it just wants to be allowed, to be invited to the table, to be asked, "What do you think?" And yes, it might say uncomfortable things. It might not be polite, but at least it's yours, not borrowed, not recycled, your voice in its rawest form, untranslated. And today, that is a revolutionary act. You know what liberates a person the most? It's not an 8-hour meditation. It's the ability to say, "This doesn't work for me anymore." That sentence opens pathways no astrologer could predict. Because what you're doing isn't letting go of an idea. You're letting go of the version of yourself that clung to it out of habit. And yes, it might leave you alone for a while. Some may drift away. Others won't understand. But between you and me, why would you want to surround yourself with people who only accept you when you perform the role well? There are people who spend their entire lives acting and end up with applause in a play they hated. And what's worse, they can't even complain because the script was praised, because the performance was flawless, because no one ever knew how much it hurt to hold that smile. Don't be that person. Don't sign an emotional contract with your shadow locked inside. Don't trade your peace for the price of approval. There are those who'd rather be misunderstood than falsely celebrated. And those people, though they may walk alone, walk lightly. Your shadow doesn't want scandal. It doesn't want destruction. It just wants light. And light isn't noise. It's permission. It's space. It's silence that doesn't hurt. It's that pause in the middle of chaos where you can finally say to yourself, "This is me." Not perfect, not polished, but real, breathing, unedited. There are people who live as if their shadow doesn't exist. But it only takes a fight, a loss, a discomfort, and there it is, sometimes dressed in sarcasm, sometimes in a strangled scream, sometimes in that moment at night when the phone is far away and the pillow has no filters. Right where no one sees you, your shadow shows up, not to scare you, to ask that you look at it without makeup. Because your shadow doesn't want to be corrected. It wants to be seen. It didn't come to harm you. It came to show you that you're still incomplete. Not because of what's missing, but because of what you're still refusing to be. Many people look for peace like someone hunting for Wi-Fi, desperately, hand in the air, asking, "Do I have signal here?" But real peace isn't in the signal. It's in the integration. It's not about eliminating discomfort. It's about no longer hating it. About saying, "This too is me, and I don't have to destroy it to grow." Some spend their lives trying to get rid of fear, anger, doubt, as if they were ink stains on a white tablecloth. But what if those stains were part of the design? What if your soul was more abstract art than fine dining? What if your beauty was in your mix, not your polish? There's a beautiful concept in Japanese culture, kintsugi, the art of repairing what's broken with gold, not to hide the cracks, but to honor them, to show that what broke is not less valuable. On the contrary, now it shines differently. That's your shadow too. It didn't come to ruin the painting, it came to show where the light came in. Of course, not everyone wants to see that. It's easier to pose for the photo than to get an X-ray. Easier to quote Instagram than to sit in silence and listen to what really hurts. But those who dare, they don't just heal, they awaken. They awaken and realize not every day needs to be perfect, that you don't have to vibrate high all the time like a meditation app with good reception, that you don't need to say affirmations in the mirror while insulting yourself under your breath. They awaken and realize that dark days aren't glitches. They're part of the story, like the slow scenes in great films. Nobody posts them on social media, but without them, the story would make no sense. And yes, your story needs those scenes, needs those moments when you didn't shine, when your voice trembled, when you got angry without elegant reasons, because that's when you were alive, not edited, not perfect, not presentable, just alive. The world today constantly tells you to be your best version, and sure, you can grow, but not at the cost of cutting off what doesn't fit your feed. Because if you only show what looks good, you become a poster, not a person. And you didn't come into this life to be a poster. You came to be a body, a soul, a contradiction. You came to cry over silly things, laugh at the wrong moments, feel jealous even after reading spiritual books, and have days when even you can't stand yourself. And all of that is okay. In fact, all of that is your light too, because true light isn't the one that avoids darkness. It's the one that walks through it without losing tenderness. And do you know the first step toward that light? Stop lying to yourself. Stop forcing. Stop talking like you've already reached enlightenment, and just begin by saying, I'm here. I don't know everything. I'm not everything, but I no longer want to hide. That act of honesty is more spiritual than 100 hours of breathless meditation. That gesture of truth is braver than all the emotional diplomas you could collect. Because there is no title more powerful than being you, fully you, undone you, laughing in the middle of chaos you. Someone once wrote, "The shadow isn't the enemy, it's the altar no one wants to approach." But you're already here. You've already taken the first step. You've begun to open the door. And that is enough. This book didn't come to offer you yet another version of yourself to improve. It came to remind you that what you hid to survive isn't broken. It's waiting to be embraced without shame. Because when you do, you'll discover something that changes everything. Your shadow isn't the end of the road, it's the way home. And here, in this home, you can finally breathe. Chapter 2. The collective mind also breeds monsters. There are things you never chose, and yet you repeat them. There are phrases echoing in your mind with such authority that you assume they're your own. But if you pause to check the source, you'll find many were spoken by your mother, your elementary school teacher, a news anchor, a religious aunt, a 90s movie, a meme, or worse, a backwards cap coach selling success while feeding you insecurity in monthly installments. The collective mind is part hypnosis, part marketing, and part veiled threat. It doesn't just tell you what to do, it tells you what you should desire, what you should fear, what it means to be okay, what love is, what success looks like, what it means to be enough. And without realizing it, you build your life on definitions you never created. Then you wonder why you don't feel alive. It's not that you're broken, it's that you've been colonized. Part of you, the part that feels strange for thinking differently, guilty for resting, pressured to always feel motivated, doesn't come from your soul. It comes from the collective choreography we dance every day, often with a smile that doesn't rise from the heart, but from the sense that this is what needs to be done. Since childhood, we've been trained to please an invisible monster, the gaze of the other. Not the real other, not the friend who listens or the grandma who brings you soup. No, the symbolic other, the one who lives inside the system, the one who grades your work, who decides what success is, who judges your way of loving, your clothes, your timing, your body, your emotions, the one who watches from inside, even when you're alone. And that other never sleeps. That other tells you whether your sadness is valid, whether your joy is too much, whether your desire is acceptable or shameful. It lives in phrases like, "It's time to grow up," "You need to move on," "You'll never make it like that," "By now, you should already have." Have what? A mortgage? A diagnosis? A half-hearted relationship? A life that looks good on the outside but tastes like reheated coffee on the inside. The collective mind also breeds monsters, but it dresses them in normalcy, and that's why they hurt so much. A woman who had been a top-level executive for 20 years gave it all up to make ceramics. When she told people, most said, "How brave." But her mother said, "And all those years of study? All that effort?" She smiled, but that sentence spun in her chest for days. Because it wasn't her mother's voice. It was the monster disguised as family pride. That monster is cunning. It says, "Don't change. What if you fail? What if you regret it?" It makes you feel like disobedience is betrayal. That changing your path is an offense to those who walked with you. But what if it's not? What if change isn't betrayal but a return to self? Sometimes the shadow doesn't come from what you suppressed. It comes from what you adopted out of fear of letting someone down. And this isn't about blaming anyone. Your parents, your teachers, your friends, they did the best they could with the map they were given. But now you have a new one. One that shows you real happiness doesn't quite fit what school taught you. Because school didn't teach you to feel. It taught you to obey. To raise your hand. To answer with what they expected. To be rewarded for fitting in and punished for questioning. Creativity, sensitivity, silence, the body, intuition were left outside the classroom. Inside, fear of not fitting in took root. And what happens when an entire generation grows up like this? As adults, many become experts at pretending and amateurs at being. It's no coincidence we're exhausted. It's no coincidence that millions need antidepressants to endure the lives they built on autopilot. It's no coincidence so many live for Fridays, dread Mondays, and repeat phrases like, "That's life," while their life slips by. This is not personal failure. This is cultural programming, and you are not alone in this. We've all been shaped by the collective mind. The problem isn't being shaped. The problem is never asking whether the mold still fits you. When you were a child, you didn't know what self-esteem was, but you knew when you were being looked at with admiration, and when you were being compared to the kid who spoke better, sat straighter, or had fewer boogers. Those looks were stored away, like old toys saved just in case. And without realizing it, you began to build your identity around what others applauded. No one explained that this is called conditioning. You just knew it worked. If you behaved, you got ice cream. If you cried too much, you were sent to your room. Welcome to the first emotional algorithm of your life. And that algorithm got smarter. It became invisible, like your phone's wallpaper, always there, but unnoticed. Until one day, you're 30, 40, 50 years old and realize that many of your decisions have been shaped by a programming you don't even remember agreeing to. Like the terms and conditions you clicked without reading, just so you could use the app. Only this time, the app was your life. And who wrote those terms? A masterful blend of culture, family, religion, television, well-meaning teachers, marketers with salaries, and a long list of voices that aren't you but live in your head as if they were your thoughts. That's why thinking differently isn't easy. You don't know where you end and the noise begins. Sometimes you want to change, but your body reacts like you're committing a crime. That's called unconscious loyalty. and it's more common than old sayings. There's a scene that repeats in many families: the child who wants to study art and the parents who ask, lovingly but fearfully, "And how will you make a living?" That's where the saga begins. The child enrolls in law school, graduates, works 10 years at a firm, earns money, develops gastritis, dreams of paintings, but says, "It's too late now." And it's not too late. It's that they're trapped in a cage shaped like expectation. The cruelest part of the collective mind is that it often makes you believe you're choosing, when in truth, you're just obeying. A woman once told me she felt guilty when she laughed. Guilty, because in her home, laughter was only allowed on special occasions: birthdays, holidays, visits. Laughing for no reason was making a fool of yourself. That idea got tattooed on her diaphragm. As an adult, when something really made her laugh, she'd cover her mouth. And the worst part wasn't that. It was that she'd never questioned it until one day someone told her, "Your laugh is beautiful. Why are you hiding it?" And in that moment, for the first time, she realized she had inherited a shadow disguised as good manners. These things aren't found in self-help books. They don't appear in the posts about raising your vibration. They're micro details, mini programs, subtle obediences we accumulate over time until they shape our identity. Like those apps running in the background that drain your battery without you even noticing. That's the collective mind, a factory-installed app. And no, this isn't about becoming a rebel without a cause. It's not about going through life yelling, "I'm different," like it's a business card. Real difference is quiet. It's internal. It's the peace you feel when you stop repeating things you don't believe, when you stop wearing clothes that don't represent you, when you stop holding on to relationships that don't expand you. It's the lightness that arrives when you start naming what you truly feel without editing it to sound pretty. The collective mind also manufactures shame, and shame doesn't always appear as guilt. Sometimes it shows up as anxiety, as the need to control everything, as that inner voice telling you you're making a big deal out of nothing. Sound familiar? That voice isn't yours. It's an old recording someone installed when they said, "Quiet down. It's not that bad." The most incredible part is that often, when you begin to deprogram yourself, the first thing that shows up isn't freedom. It's fear. Fear of disappointing, of being alone, of not being understood. It's logical. Freedom is dizzying when you're coming from a rigid structure. That's why some, just when they're about to walk through the door of their authenticity, take a step back. They say, "I'll just stay where I am. It's not that bad." But it is. Because if your soul has to constantly negotiate with your environment, that's not a life. It's damage control. And no, you don't have to quit everything and move to the woods. You don't need to change cities, friends, or religions. What changes is the awareness with which you inhabit each space. What changes is the language you use when speaking to yourself, the way you answer when someone asks how you are and you stop saying, "Fine, all good," like an automatic password. Your gaze changes when you realize you can be sad without feeling like a burden, that you can want something different without feeling selfish, that you can question your culture without hating it. Because it's not about destroying what you inherited. It's about taking it apart, understanding it, being grateful for what helped, and letting go of what no longer resonates. Just like cleaning out your closet and getting rid of that jacket you haven't worn since your cousin's wedding in 2008, you can also clean out your belief system. Some ideas are expired, others have moth holes, and some were never yours to begin with. Want to know if an idea belongs to you or to the collective mind? Feel how it sits in your body. If it expands you, gives you air, brings a spontaneous smile, it's probably yours. If it contracts you, pressures you, makes you feel in debt, return it. It's not yours. It's a loan with emotional interest. And you don't need to sign any manifestos or start a revolution on social media. All you need to do is begin to live from the inside out. Stop chasing approval like it's oxygen. Stop asking for permission to exist. Stop apologizing for feeling different. Because the collective mind doesn't deactivate with rage. It deactivates with presence, with new choices, with a truth that doesn't need to scream because it has finally found its tone. And that tone, you're already beginning to hear it. There is a modern ritual most people practice without realizing it: the obsessive search for external validation. It's not on any religious calendar, but it's celebrated daily. It starts the moment you open your eyes and check your phone notifications. Each like, each message, each interaction is a tiny sacrifice at the altar of collective self-worth. And what happens when the screen doesn't deliver what you expected? Suddenly, something inside you deflates, like a balloon that stayed too long at a party it never wanted to attend. Because deep down, that's the paradox. You're waiting for others to give you value, but what you get is anxiety wrapped in shiny packaging. The collective mind doesn't just create obvious monsters. It also creates small addictions, unnamed insecurities that show up as a quiet daily void, like the subtle fear you feel when no one replies to your message right away, like the discomfort of posting a photo and not getting attention, like the quiet panic of wondering whether you're doing enough. Not because your soul needs any of this, but because you grew up in a system that taught you to measure your worth by external approval. And of course, it's not that social media is bad. It's like sugar. In small doses, it sweetens life. In excess, it makes you dependent on artificial highs that come with an emotional bill. But the collective mind doesn't warn you about this. On the contrary, it sells you more sugar than judges you for being anxious. I once met a successful woman on social media who said to me with a nervous laugh, "If I don't post something every day, I feel like I don't exist." She said it jokingly, but there was something sad in her tone, because she's not the only one. There's an entire generation that learned to define itself through the algorithm, that measures its self-esteem by likes, and that feels worthless if its life isn't being seen by someone else. And the most ironic part is that many people speak of freedom while being voluntary prisoners of a digital social standard. They wake up seeking validation and fall asleep wondering if they're interesting enough. The real question is, interesting to whom? Because if you need to prove your worth to the world every single day, then something inside you is broken, disconnected, or simply forgotten. That's how cunning the collective shadow is. It doesn't show up as evil, it shows up as success, as approval, as fame. But beneath that apparent glow, there's often a deep loneliness. Have you ever been in a room full of people and felt profoundly alone? It's not because no one loves you. It's because you've gotten used to being seen, but not truly known. And between being seen and being known, there's an ocean of difference. Being seen means showing the version others expect. Being known means showing who you truly are, even when it's not perfect. It means allowing yourself to be vulnerable, to make mistakes, to say, "This is how I feel, and I don't know how to fix it." But of course, that doesn't always earn applause. More often, it earns uncomfortable silences, and those silences are precisely what the collective mind is trying to avoid. The culture of approval trained us to smile quickly, to be efficient, to be pleasant, to never trouble others with our sadness, our doubt, our imperfection. But if you never cause discomfort, if you never speak your truth, then you're condemned to perform in someone else's film. And the worst part is, it's not even a good film. I once heard a man say at a conference, "I'm successful at what I hate the most." The room fell silent. No one knew how to respond. How do you congratulate someone for succeeding at something they detest? That is exactly what happens when the collective mind defines your goals. It doesn't just hand you borrowed goals. It hands you prizes you don't enjoy and ambitions you never chose. And so, you end up collecting trophies that don't represent you. There is something deeply sad about spending your whole life perfecting a version of yourself that you're not interested in, because sooner or later, that version becomes heavy, exhausting, numbing, and what once looked like success ends up being a well-paid form of anxiety. The collective shadow doesn't want you to be happy. It wants you to be productive, efficient, predictable. It wants you to fit inside the box of success defined by someone else. And when you decide to step out of that box, the collective shadow whispers, "You're making a mistake. You'll regret this. Who do you think you are to be different?" Those voices are not yours. They are echoes of centuries of accumulated fear, of generations who learned to conform because it was safer than exploring. But you didn't come to this life just to fit in. You came to explore, to question, to laugh at the absurdity of living for applause. External approval can pat you on the back, but it can't fill the inner void that longs for truth, because your soul didn't come into this world to be liked by everyone. It came to love itself. And that means sometimes walking alone. That means sometimes making others uncomfortable. That means saying things that may not sound pretty, but that always set you free. Because when you stop measuring your worth by the reactions of others, something magical happens. You discover you're free to exist as you are. You discover that your authentic laugh is worth more than any like, that your honest silence is worth more than any applause, and that your real presence is worth more than any borrowed approval. Because in the end, it doesn't matter how many followers you have, how many people approve of you, or how many trophies you collect. The only thing that matters is whether, when you turn off your phone, when you're alone with yourself, you can say calmly, "I'm here, I see myself," and for the first time that's enough. One of the great mistakes of the collective mind was turning natural pleasures into monsters disguised as sin. Eating, loving, feeling pleasure, enjoying intimacy, these are as human as breathing. But something happened along the way. Someone, somewhere, decided pleasure was dangerous. And so, generation after generation, we learned that feeling too much, wanting too much, enjoying too much was a threat. That if something brought you too much joy, you should be suspicious. That you had to limit yourself, censor yourself, feel guilty. The result? Millions of people who eat with guilt, love with fear, and enjoy with anxiety. People who don't inhabit their bodies. They monitor them like strict guards. People who don't feel their emotions. They sweep them under the rug of, "This isn't appropriate." Because of course the collective mind doesn't just create external monsters, it builds inner prisons too. The shadow of our vices isn't found in pleasure itself, but in how we relate to it. Eating is beautiful, but when food becomes the only hug you allow yourself, it stops being nourishment and becomes anesthesia. Sex can be a deep connection, but when used to fill emotional gaps, it stops being intimacy and becomes a patch that never truly heals. Ambition can be a drive for growth, but when it becomes your only metric of worth, it turns into an exhausting race to nowhere. And the problem is, no one ever teaches us how to experience these pleasures in a healthy way. What we get are mixed messages. On one side, ads telling you to be free, to enjoy, to live fully. On the other, a culture that secretly judges you if you do it too much, that wants you to succeed but then criticizes you for being too ambitious, that encourages you to find love but then shames you for enjoying it too much. It's like living in a poorly written movie, full of characters who don't know their roles. And so, without realizing it, you end up building a half-life, enjoying with guilt, loving with fear, seeking pleasure with anxiety. Not because you're weak or flawed, but because you grew up in a society that never knew what to do with joy. A society that, for centuries, punished spontaneous laughter, censored unfiltered joy, outlawed deep delight. Do you know what's most ironic? That the greatest artists in human history, the geniuses we revere in museums, books, and films, were precisely the ones who dared to live against the current of the collective mind. Picasso didn't paint to gain the approval of his neighbors. He painted from his raw, unfiltered desire. Marilyn Monroe wasn't loved because she played it safe. She was loved because there was a wild freedom in her that defied every rule. Freddie Mercury didn't become a legend by meeting expectations. He became one by daring to sing his truth, even when no one understood it. And yet, we admire rebellion in others, but struggle to practice it ourselves. We celebrate those who break the mold, but are terrified to shatter our own. And in that contradiction, our lives slip through our fingers. Because living for others' approval for how you love, eat, feel, or desire, is like asking for permission to breathe. And when you ask for permission to breathe, you never really inhale. A woman once told me that whenever she enjoyed something too much, she felt a kind of internal alarm go off, like she was doing something wrong. Even when she laughed too loudly, she'd cover her mouth in embarrassment. I asked her where that came from, and at first, she didn't know. But then she remembered the phrases that shaped her childhood. Don't make so much noise. Eat with moderation. Act like a lady. Without realizing it, she had inherited a shadow that taught her to experience joy in half measures. Shadows like these aren't healed through guilt. They're healed through awareness, by recognizing that those messages are not absolute truths, but opinions passed down without your consent. Healing begins when you realize that healthy pleasure is not sin, it's mental health. That unfiltered laughter is not improper, it's emotional medicine. That loving without fear is not dangerous, it's the most courageous act in the world. And how do you escape that mental prison? First, by identifying the inner voices that limit you. Whose voices are they? Your parents, a teachers, a priests, and influencers. Second, by questioning them. Do they still speak for you? And third, by replacing them with a new voice, your own, real, unedited. A voice that allows you to inhabit your body without shame, your desire without fear, your joy without guilt. Because you didn't come into this world to apologize for feeling. You came to live fully, to love wholeheartedly, to eat with delight, to laugh without asking permission. You came to savor this human experience without having to pass an external approval test every 5 minutes. You came to honor your body, your longing, your joy as sacred gifts, not shameful vices. True pleasure doesn't make you addicted. What creates addiction is the guilt that trails behind it. It's the anxiety of thinking you're doing it wrong. It's the compulsive need for approval, for validation from others. If you want to break free from the addiction to vices, you first have to break free from the addiction to approval. Because when you no longer need others to validate your joy, your desire, your laughter, you are free to live them fully. And that freedom is the true antidote to addiction. When you live from your truth, from your authenticity, you no longer need emotional anesthetics. Because an authentic life doesn't hurt, even if it makes others uncomfortable. Conscious pleasure carries no shame, even if others don't understand it. To love freely is not a sin, even if others judge you for it. And when you begin to live like that, when you discover that your joy is legitimate, that your pleasure is sacred, that your laughter is welcome, something shifts within you forever. You no longer need to hide to feel good. You no longer need permission to exist. You no longer need to apologize for being who you are. Because finally, you understand that life didn't come with someone else's instruction manual. It came with your soul, your body, your heart. And the only real rule is this: honor your existence with the deepest respect possible. No guilt, no fear, no conditions, just truth. And within that truth is your true liberation. Something fascinating happens when you begin to free yourself from other people's voices. You realize that many of the things you thought you deeply desired weren't really yours. They were implanted desires, from commercials, from movies, from family gatherings where no one told the truth but everyone nodded politely. It's like that painting someone hung on your wall years ago, and you've stared at it ever since without knowing why it's still there. Until one day, you take it down, and the wall looks better without it. The collective mind has filled your life with borrowed decorations, beliefs you never questioned, dreams that never truly belonged to you. Do you know what one of the most invisible prisons we've inherited is? The idea that there's always something more to achieve before you can finally feel complete. A new car, a bigger house, a more intense relationship, a better job, more recognition. The collective mind calls this ambition, progress, success. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to grow. What's wrong is believing you'll only be okay once you reach the next thing. Because that kind of success has no finish line. It's an endless staircase to nowhere. Many people reach the top only to discover there's nothing there but a panoramic view of emptiness. At some point, someone convinced us that our worth depends on what we achieve. But no one taught us how to enjoy what we already have. We were taught to chase relentlessly, but never how to rest in the joy of simply being. That's why so many people live in a constant state of comparison, comparing their bodies, their relationships, their jobs, their vacations. And the saddest part is that this constant comparison creates anxiety disguised as aspiration. It's never enough, because there's always someone with more, someone who seems happier, someone whose life looks shinier. But here's the trap. You're comparing your reality to an edited image of someone else. That photo on social media is just a carefully curated fragment of their existence. No one posts the awkward silences, the midnight tears, the doubt in front of the mirror. No one uploads videos of their fears or real-time anxiety. The collective mind has made you believe you're falling behind in a race where everyone's pretending to be ahead. And worse, it's convinced you that your worth depends on how well you run. If you want to stop being a prisoner of this absurd comparison, you have to start running your own race. One where the only rule is to honor what you truly want, what you truly need, what you truly enjoy. A race where you can pause without guilt, move forward without anxiety, change direction without shame. A famous actress once said she spent years trying to reach the top only to discover that the top was empty. Because what truly fulfills you is not arriving, but loving the path you walk, enjoying your life as you live it, not just once you've achieved something specific. And that doesn't mean abandoning your dreams. It means no longer tying them to external validation. Because when your dreams are truly yours, the very act of pursuing them brings joy. You don't need applause at the end because every step is already a celebration. This also applies to the shadow of power and influence. The collective mind idolizes those with followers, money, visibility. But having followers doesn't mean you're truly heard. Having money doesn't mean you're emotionally abundant. Having power doesn't mean you have peace. You could have millions watching you and still feel deeply alone. Because what fills your soul isn't how many people see you. It's the quality of life you experience when no one is watching. The collective mind also manufactures cardboard idols. People who seem perfect from the outside but feel miserable on the inside. Because somewhere along the way, they agreed to play a role that was never theirs, simply because it looked good. And now, they feel like they're living someone else's life, even if the world applauds them for it. True courage isn't meeting other people's expectations. It's daring to live without them. It's asking yourself, if no one were watching, how would I really live my life? When you start asking that question, you'll notice many addictions and vices begin to fade on their own. Because often, what drives you into those dark corners isn't weakness. It's deep dissatisfaction. It's the anxiety of living a life that doesn't nourish you. So you reach for quick anesthetics, food, sex, social media, substances, anything to silence the ache, if only for a moment. But when you begin living your truth, the need for anesthesia disappears because your life itself becomes your medicine. There's something profoundly healing about no longer trying to fit into someone else's mold. Something powerful awakens when you stop comparing your life to pre-packaged images. Your self-worth no longer hangs on external hooks. It starts to root itself in something firmer, deeper, more real. Your authentic essence, your unique way of being in the world. You don't need a photogenic life to feel valuable. You don't need to compete constantly to feel alive. What you truly need is to realize that you weren't born to fulfill someone else's checklist. You were born to discover your own truth and live from there. With mistakes, with doubts, with unexpected turns, but always with honesty. Because in the end, when you're alone in silence with yourself, you won't remember how many followers you had or how much you owned. You'll remember how you felt while you were alive. You'll remember whether you were true to yourself, whether you loved without fear, whether you enjoyed without guilt, whether you laughed without asking permission. And in that moment, you'll realize something powerful. True freedom isn't reaching what others expect of you. It's no longer needing it. True happiness isn't about being better than others. It's about being joyfully, unapologetically, fully yourself. No filters, no conditions, no explanations. When you understand this, you stop running anyone else's race, because your life is no longer an absurd competition. It becomes what it was always meant to be, a constant celebration of the one thing that can never be repeated, your own existence. Love isn't complicated. We make it complicated. Love is a natural act, as instinctive as breathing. But the collective mind taught us to see it as a complex equation, a desperate race toward outside approval. It made us believe that love meant filling voids, finding missing pieces, fitting into perfect roles we saw in Hollywood movies or popular songs. It made us feel incomplete, as if we'd only be happy once we found someone to validate us from the outside. But real love has nothing to do with validation. It's about recognition, authenticity, and courage. It's finding someone who sees your shadow and doesn't run away, who celebrates your light without trying to contain it. Someone who understands that your humanity isn't something to fix or polish, but something to love deeply. And this is only possible when you first learn to give yourself that same love. The true tragedy is that many people walk through life demanding a love they themselves don't know how to give. They ask for understanding they deny themselves, seek tenderness they never offer inwardly, long for acceptance they've never truly felt toward who they are. And it's not because they're selfish or broken. It's because no one taught them that before finding love outside, they had to cultivate it within. No one showed them that their first love must always be for themselves. And what happens when you seek love from emptiness? You choose from desperation. You accept anything, tolerate the intolerable, negotiate your worth because you think that's all you deserve. You cling to people who can't love you because you haven't learned how to love yourself. You try to fill with someone else what you've never filled on your own. And it never works, because no one can fill a void that isn't theirs. But the kind of love that grows from wholeness is a different story. When you truly love yourself, you don't look for someone to complete you. You look for someone to walk with you. Someone who stands with you in your light and in your shadow, in wakefulness and in dreams, without conditions or labels. Someone with whom to share life honestly, not from need, but from fullness. Because when you learn to live in your own heart, love becomes a gift, not a demand. To love truly is to embrace your humanity without shame. It's to accept your vulnerability without guilt. It's to understand that you deserve the best, not because you're perfect, but because you exist. Real love doesn't measure, compare, or confine. It lets you be who you truly are. It walks beside your growth, celebrates your changes, honors your silences. and it never asks you to sacrifice your truth just to fit someone else's. The collective mind has taught you to care for your body and your image to stand out, to be accepted, to fit into a mold you never chose. But it never taught you to care for your soul out of self-love. It never told you that your worth is not in how others see you, but in how you feel when no one is watching. And that's why so many people live disconnected from themselves, polishing a brilliant facade while neglecting their essence. Then they seek love from that place, from disconnection. But real love can never emerge from a facade. It can only be born of absolute authenticity, from a heart that knows how to love itself, that knows how to give itself space, that knows how to say yes when it means it and no when it must. A heart that recognizes its worth doesn't come from how much it's admired, but from how deeply it respects itself. The key to loving another is not trying to give what you don't have. It's sharing what already lives within you. Love isn't measured, calculated, or negotiated. Love is felt. It's breathed. It's lived in every quiet gesture. It reveals itself in how you listen to another, how you respect their silence, how you walk beside them without trying to lead. Because authentic love has nothing to do with control. It has everything to do with freedom. And to offer that freedom to someone else, you first have to give it to yourself. You can't offer full love while still living under the tyranny of outside approval. You can't give understanding if you still judge yourself for every mistake. You can't share genuine joy if you still believe happiness will only come when you meet some external condition. This is the great secret about love the collective mind forgot to tell you. The person who needs your love the most is you. The most important relationship you'll ever have is with yourself, because from that relationship, all others will flow. When you learn to be at peace with yourself, when you learn to hold your shadow as tenderly as your light, love is no longer something you chase. It becomes something you meet. You stop seeking validation because you no longer need it. You stop begging for approval because you know your worth is unquestionable. You no longer fear solitude because you've discovered your own company is the greatest gift you can give yourself. And from that place of inner fullness, the love you give to others becomes a natural extension of your own joy, your own light. You no longer wait for someone to fill your life. You hope to share the abundance of life already flowing within you. You no longer get lost in unrealistic expectations. You live reality with honesty, knowing that to love is to accept another in all their glorious imperfection. This is the love that transforms. This is the love that liberates. This is the love that rises after you've healed your own heart, after you've lived in your own truth, after you've loved yourself so deeply that sharing yourself no longer feels risky. It feels inevitable. The collective mind may go on building monsters, but you no longer need to follow them. Because now you understand that the only true love is the one born from authenticity, from deep respect for your essence, from the joy of being exactly who you are, without asking permission, without apologizing. And in that magical moment, when you finally love yourself without conditions, you discover the greatest truth of all. You were never incomplete. You were always enough. You were always worthy of love. And that, exactly that, is the moment when you truly begin to live. From this moment on, let your ego be just that, your ego. In other words, your shadow. And then you'll see it for what it's always been, your reflection. The same reflection that reveals the light is on, because every shadow is necessary for the light to appear. The shadow is perfect. If it weren't, why would death exist? Death is the shadow of life. And if it didn't exist, how would you ever cherish the life you have? How could you value something that never ends? There must be a cliff, so you can feel safe where you stand. The slavery of this age is the shadow. That shadow that tells you why you're not happy. The one the world projects into your eyes and ears in all the infinite forms of life that reflect in your mind. Neighbors, siblings, friends, parents, the poor, the rich, the ugly, the beautiful, friend, enemy, spirituality, mindfulness, pain, rage, blood. And what's curious is that when you see that light through other eyes, it's the shadow that nudges you toward happiness. It's the shadow that sparks the flame. Because something in that darkness whispers to you, go on, play, love yourself, laugh, love. Love until you become a slave to love. And tell me, what's the problem? Get addicted to joy or end your own existence. Because for you, I'll always be here. But of course, everything changes when you turn the light on. Then you become life. You become the seasoning of life. And you value the oxygen that allows you to create, imagine, build your own satisfaction, or simply revel in the miracle of being. You breathe, you give thanks, and you celebrate the gift of being here. As Jesus once said, though his message was later distorted, he simply wanted you, with each breath, to receive life from the same source that gives fruit. The one that doesn't ask if you're good or bad, it just gives. Because you're an intelligent animal, and here you go, nourishment without conditions. And let's not forget our ancestors. Because thanks to the collective memory, you can now find that same fruit anywhere in the world out of season at a supermarket. That is life. That is light, transformed into collective well-being. In the end, the shadow is just the one who shows you that the light, and therefore life, is all right. The collective mind proves it every day. We've come out of the jungle and now buy in the supermarket the fruits of millions of minds that chose to pour their creativity into the well-being of all. People who dedicated their lives to inventing, discovering, building, connecting. And thanks to them, you now walk through a city, drive a car, light a screen, and share thoughts with the world. Those inventors of well-being were embodied lights in organic bodies. They were shadows that embraced themselves and chose to become medicine for others. And that's why we're here, you and I speaking from within humanity's invisible network, lighting one more candle, illuminating one more corner of the soul. For many awakened beings, life becomes an all-in with pocket aces. Because it seems like they've already freed themselves from ego, that they've escaped their shadows. But it's not that they don't have them. It's that they've learned to listen, to read their codes, to see that urge to judge the neighbor and say, "Thank you for showing me what I have yet to heal." To notice envy disguised as criticism and recognize, there's something I admire that I still don't allow myself. And then the shadow is no longer a prison. It becomes a mirror, a teacher, an ally. Even sacrifice, which sometimes seems painful when done out of love, stops being sacrifice. It becomes effort with meaning, like someone climbing a mountain with a heavy pack, but knowing that the view at the top will change their life. It's the ego, too, that reminds you those moments existed, the love, the effort, the surrender, and it's the shadow that reflects that light, the same light you carry within even when you forget. We believe ego is something petty because it guards our shadows, so we try to restrain it, limit it, push it into a corner. But how can you contain a shadow if you haven't even learned how to hold the light? You can't contain either. You can only learn to live within them, to breathe through them. When you learn how to hold the light, shadows don't dim you. They make you shine brighter. They add depth, more pleasure. Because life isn't only expansion, it's also contrast, it's also pause, it's also silence. Life only unfolds fully in a mind that can look at its shadow with the same love it gives its light. Like someone who understands both are part of the same whole, the same miracle. And how beautiful it is when your mind wavers, loses its balance, fills with noise, but comes back to the slope that lifts it from chaos and returns it to being. You can call it resentment, lust, power, ego, vices, but at the core, they're nothing more than shadows. And when you look at them from the other side, from the consciousness you've cultivated, you smile and say, now that I've tasted what's real, there's nothing left for me in that darkness. That, my dear brothers of light, that is simply beautiful. Chapter 3. The Alchemy of Living by Your Own Light. In a corner of the world, where few ever look, something happened that words can hardly capture, but we'll try anyway. There was a mind, one like yours, like mine, like anyone's, a restless mind, generous, contradictory, brilliant, and deeply confused, not from a lack of intelligence, but from an excess of voices. Voices from teachers who never asked if you wanted to learn, voices from commercials, from parents, from influencers, from aunts who said, you don't do that, from uncles who whispered, you don't feel that way. A mind full of borrowed shadows, no longer sure whether it was thinking or being thought. One night, that mind did something extraordinary. It stopped. It didn't awaken. It didn't ascend. It didn't vibrate higher. It simply stopped, like a train halting before the cliff, like a child pausing before doing something they know they shouldn't, but doing it anyway. And in that silence, the unexpected happened. The shadow spoke. It didn't curse. It didn't complain. It simply said, thank you for seeing me. And from there, everything began. Because the shadow, that part of you you hid away to survive, is not your enemy. It is the echo of the light you were too afraid to show. It's the emotion you swallowed in childhood that now sours your adulthood. It's the desire you dressed up as ambition, the rage you buried in your throat, the love you censored so it wouldn't be noticed. The shadow doesn't want to destroy you. It wants to be heard. And here comes the most beautiful paradox. There is only shadow where there is light. That is, if you have shadow, it means you are already shining. You just haven't yet learned how to see that brilliance without fear. Have you ever thought that everything that bothers you in others is, in fact, a mirror of what you still haven't healed within yourself? That the neighbor who irritates you, the ex who still hurts, the boss who tries to control you, are all actors in the play your shadow is directing? But don't punish yourself for that. Don't be ashamed. That too is human. That too is creation. Because life wasn't made to be lived without mistakes, without contradictions, without drama. It was made for you to discover that even fear has beauty, that even your ego, the one you judge with your pretend spirituality, is a tender part of you trying to protect itself. The ego isn't the enemy. It's the shadow wearing a business suit. It's the need to be right because you don't know how to hold your own vulnerability. It's the urge to control because no one ever taught you how to trust. And that's okay. You didn't come here to get everything right. You came to discover yourself, to make conscious mistakes, to cry over silly things and then laugh at how ridiculous it all was. You came to feel deeply, to feel too much. And when you feel the shadow choking you, remember, it's only your soul knocking at the door. Sometimes it comes disguised as rage, sometimes as anxiety, sometimes as existential exhaustion, but it's always an invitation to return to yourself, to what's simple, to what's real. Because in this world, we all have a moment when we realize the mind is just a room of mirrors. And the only way not to get lost is to stop running, stay, breathe, listen. Look your shadow in the eye and say, thank you for reminding me I haven't fully embraced myself yet. And there, the second act of your life begins. The act where you no longer run, where you no longer perform, where you no longer pretend to be okay while falling apart in silence. Because now you know that falling apart isn't the end, it's the threshold. Imagine for a moment that every selfish thought, every quiet judgment, every tiny act of ego you've had are not failures. They're clues. They're encrypted messages your consciousness sends to get your attention, not to punish you, not to make you feel bad, but to wake you up. Because the most dangerous thing about the shadow isn't that it exists. It's that no one taught you how to look at it with love. Everyone wants to transcend the ego, but few have ever listened to it. And sometimes, all the ego wants is a little dignity. It wants to hear, "Thank you for protecting me when I was a child and didn't know how to defend myself. Thank you for trying to hold up my worth when everyone said I had none." The thing is, you grew up, and now what once protected you is what's holding you back. And that's not a problem. That's evolution. The shadow isn't a dark entity. It's a room full of your old selves still waiting for a hug. The 7-year-old you who believed crying was dangerous. The 17-year-old who was ashamed of their body. The 30-year-old who pretended not to be afraid just to be respected. They're all still there, waiting for you to stop pretending you don't know them. And now you know that parade of inner shadows is not weakness. It's humanity. And do you know what's most brilliant? Your mind can be light too. That same mind that repeats mistakes, replays trauma, projects fears, is also the one that can pause, observe, and transform. The mind is like a garden of flowers and weeds. You don't have to pull everything out. Just learn to recognize, to nurture what feeds you, and stop watering what poisons you. Thought doesn't make you guilty. It makes you a creator. Judgment doesn't make you evil. It makes you human. What transforms you is not erasing your shadows. It's making them part of your masterpiece. It's saying, "This is part of me too, and from here, I can choose something new." Do you know why some people never change? It's not because they don't want to. It's because they believe that if they change, they will no longer be loved. Because somewhere in their programming, someone taught them they'd only be loved if they were a certain way: strong, cheerful, efficient, compliant, not weird, not intense, not emotional. And so, many people hide their shadows, because deep down, they're afraid that if they show them, they'll be left behind. But here you are, reading this, and that means you've already taken the bravest step, recognizing that you're ready to stop hiding, that you're tired of playing a role that doesn't resonate with your soul, that you no longer want to be applauded for what you're not. And here's a secret they don't tell you in self-help books or 2-minute viral videos. You didn't come into this life to eliminate your shadows. You came to become a master of contrast. Because if you don't know your shadow, how will you recognize your light? Death reminds you you're alive. Fear reminds you that you want to move forward. Anger shows you where you lost your power. Sadness tells you something needs care. And even envy, that deeply uncomfortable emotion, is sometimes just trying to say what you see in them also lives in you. You just haven't nurtured it yet. So don't suppress, don't hide, don't cover up. Breathe, observe, embrace. Because when you stop fighting what you feel, you become one with what you are. And that's when true freedom is born. Not the freedom to do whatever you want. The freedom to be with yourself without fear. To stop needing a costume in order to be loved. To no longer have to explain your worth. To no longer apologize for existing as you are. That is the kind of freedom you can't buy. You don't learn it in courses. Gurus don't give it to you. Followers don't confirm it. That is the kind of freedom that blooms when you stop living from your shadow and begin to live from your truth. And maybe not everyone will understand that change. Maybe some will walk away. Maybe you'll shed old skins, old habits, old names. But don't worry, because what is truly yours will stay, and what isn't will be released. And that too is light. Now take a pause. Listen to your breath. Feel your body. Your shadow is here, not to darken you, but to remind you that you have always been light, that the shadow simply revealed the places where you had yet to ignite your truth. And now, you are ready, not to shine perfectly, but to live authentically. And that is the first miracle of all, the true beginning of your new existence. So go on, shadow and all, with tears if needed, with fear if it's still there. but with the certainty that this time you walk with yourself. And that's all you need, because now you know the shadow didn't come to cover you. It came to show you that the light was already you. In a village hidden between mountains where roosters crow without asking permission and windows open so silence can come in for breakfast, there lived an old man who never wore a watch. Not because he rejected time, but because he always knew exactly when it was time to live. He said he could feel it in the soles of his feet, in the warmth of the bread, in the gaze of the donkey who watched him without judgment from the other side of the corral. Some called him wise, others strange. He simply considered himself free, not free from taxes nor free from responsibility, free from needing to prove to the world who he was. That is the kind of freedom you can't post on social media, can't add to your resume, can't turn into a marketing strategy. It's the freedom of someone who has stopped chasing themselves, someone who no longer craves applause or epiphanies or instant enlightenment like some buy one get one deal from the spiritual aisle of the emotional supermarket. And that's where many get stuck, in the idea that life must follow a grand script, a majestic purpose, an epic story to retell on a podcast. But what if that's not what it's about? What if real alchemy isn't about turning lead into gold, but about making your routine a livable space? What if you don't need to heal everything before being happy? What if all it takes is to stop hiding from yourself? A lot of people search for their inner voice as if it were a lost object under the couch. They don't realize that the voice isn't found, it's uncovered, because it was never hidden. It was simply buried under phrases like, be strong, don't cry, keep quiet. That's not how it's done. Phrases that clung to the soul like wallpaper, covering something that was already beautiful without decorations. So you grow up, get educated, get informed, fill yourself with concepts, and yet you feel farther from yourself than when you were a child who cried because their soup didn't come in star shapes. That child didn't know about coaching, but they knew when something didn't feel right. They knew when something hurt. They knew when something resonated. We live in times where silence has become a luxury item, where thinking without interruption is almost a revolutionary act, where the algorithm knows more about you than your own heart. And in the middle of that chaos, alchemy begins the way great things begin, quietly, in a gesture that needs no witnesses, in a simple decision like, today, I will not demand anything of myself that lacks soul. Some people heal in the middle of noise and others can only hear their truth when everything shuts down. But we all, at some point, need that emotional blackout when the system crashes and the essential reveals itself. And the essential almost always has to do with returning to yourself. Not to stay locked there, but to rebuild without the filters of collective thinking. A man once told me the only time he ever felt true peace was at a barber shop. They were washing his hair, and for 3 exact minutes, he closed his eyes and allowed himself not to think about anything. He wasn't a monk. He didn't meditate. He had no idea about chakras or frequencies. He simply surrendered to the warm water and the anonymous hands asking nothing in return. It was just a moment, he said, but in that moment, I realized my soul doesn't need explanations. It just needs moments like that. That is alchemy, transforming the ordinary into sacred without making a scene. Learning to read your shadow not as a threat, but as a letter you've yet to open. Realizing that you didn't come to this world to fix a mistake, but to recognize your unrepeatable way of being here. Sometimes as chaos, sometimes as calm, but always you. And it's not about finding your purpose like a golden key in a video game. It's about feeling purpose while living, while watering a plant, while petting your dog, while walking down a street with no name that still makes you feel whole. Because meaning is not something you buy. Meaning is something you build with attention, with presence, with the ability to look at your life without demanding it be aesthetically perfect. Great changes don't come with trumpets. Sometimes they happen when you choose not to react the same way you did yesterday, when you decide not to rush to reply to that message, when you listen without interrupting, when you give yourself permission to be sad without needing to justify it. Because sometimes the greatest form of love is simply giving yourself space. And what this world needs most right now isn't more information. It's more space, more pauses, more people who know how to simply be without filling everything with noise. Because real love, the kind that transforms, is not the one that arrives with fireworks and promises of forever. It's the one that holds you while you fall apart. The one that doesn't run when you show your shadow. The one that looks at you and doesn't say, "You need to get better," but instead says, "I'm here." That kind of love must first come from you to you, because no one can offer you tenderness if you haven't learned to offer it to yourself. And that doesn't come from pretty phrases or meditations edited with ambient music. It comes from practice, from failing, from forgiving yourself, from coming back. And that practice begins now. Sometimes we think that healing requires something extraordinary, a trip to Tibet, eating quinoa, learning to pronounce unpronounceable words in ancient languages. But the truth is simpler, and because of that, harder to accept. Real alchemy happens when you stop hiding what you are, when you no longer pretend to have it all figured out, when you admit that some days you feel like reheated soup in a microwave, lacking scent or texture, but still warm enough to save you. Those days when you are neither sun nor shadow, just existence. That in-between place where you don't know if you're falling apart or rebuilding, where there are no fireworks, no epiphanies, no phrases worthy of a yoga t-shirt, just you, breathing. And that, even if it doesn't look like much, is sacred. A woman once told me that her most transformative moment didn't come during an ancestral ceremony or at a spiritual retreat. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday, folding laundry. Suddenly, as she paired socks, she realized she had spent years trying to be the good daughter, and she didn't want that anymore. She didn't even know what being good meant. She only knew that role no longer fit her soul. She finished folding the laundry, made herself some tea, and in that quiet, tearless, wordless moment, she knew her new life had begun. Because transformation often arrives like that, unannounced, like a silent notification in your heart, like an invisible crack in the armor you've worn, like that moment when you decide, without saying it out loud, that you're done lying to yourself. And not out of rebellion, out of self-love. It's that kind of love you don't shout about, that you don't need to post, that doesn't come with sepia filters or cursive quotes. It's a quiet love, one that shows up in the way you speak to yourself when you mess up, in how you keep yourself company during insomnia, in how you forgive yourself for not always being who you hoped you'd be. Because alchemy, that word that sounds like ancient magic, has nothing to do with turning into someone else. It's about remembering who you were before they taught you to stop being that. About coming home to yourself without all the judgment, without all the you shoulds. And yes, that can be scary. Because we've been trained to evaluate everything, even our own happiness, even our own emotions. I'm not okay, but I shouldn't feel this way. I'm fine, but not as fine as I should be. And so we go on measuring ourselves with an invisible ruler we didn't invent, one that's never satisfied, one that always wants just a little more productivity, more clarity, more control, more likes, more self-love, as if even loving yourself had to be done efficiently. And here comes one of the truths most people avoid. Not everything can be improved. Not everything can be controlled. Some things just need to be felt, to be accompanied, to be breathed through. Like someone who watches the rain and doesn't try to stop it, but simply sits on the porch and listens to it fall. That gesture, so simple, so human, so forgotten, being with yourself without demands. Because there's nothing more exhausting than living as if you're always waiting to be ready to live. We see it all the time. People who won't start a project until they've taken the perfect course, who won't allow themselves to dance until they have the perfect body, who won't let themselves love until they have the perfect life. And meanwhile, life passes by, and the project never begins, and the body grows tired of waiting, and the heart goes numb from putting tenderness on hold. You didn't come into this life to collect emotional achievements like a LinkedIn profile. You came to live yourself, to experience, to laugh at your own dramas, to undo inner knots that can't be untangled with theory, only with humanity. And that humanity, so yours, so ours, reveals itself when you let your guard down, when you stop pretending you have all the answers, when you allow yourself to cry for no apparent reason, to laugh at the wrong moment, to love even when it doesn't make sense, to lose your way for a while without apologizing for it. Because that too is alchemy, not needing to justify your existence. One of the great challenges of our time is unlearning the need for constant explanation. Not everything you feel has to make logical sense. Not every sadness comes with a lesson. Sometimes you're sad, period. Sometimes you need silence, period. Sometimes you don't know what's happening to you, and that's okay. What's not okay is forcing yourself to explain something the world won't understand when you're still learning how to feel it. The world doesn't need you to explain yourself. It needs you to feel yourself, to live in yourself, to listen to yourself. And that doesn't mean isolating. It means that when you go out into the world, you do so from your center, not from your mask. And yes, maybe your center is still under construction, but even that is alchemy. The shadow doesn't always wear darkness. Sometimes it hides in routine. In that morning when you open your eyes and feel nothing, not sadness, not joy, nothing. As if life had become a chore you sign off on each day without spirit. And that's when the real danger begins, when we stop being amazed, when we mistake repetition for reality, when a sunrise is no longer breaking news and a hug no longer stirs you. But sometimes all it takes is a gesture, a song, a story that touches you in just the right place, an image that reminds you you're still here, breathing, living, existing. And then you understand that not all is lost, that as long as there's a spark of presence, there's fire waiting to be lit. Because life, even when you forget it, is still a privilege. Remember this, humanity has also had its moments of unbeatable beauty. When Van Gogh, with his tormented mind, still believed sunflowers were reason enough to paint. When Louis Armstrong blew into a trumpet silenced by segregation and made the whole world hear the same language, the language of the soul. When a tiny, unwavering Albanian nun decided that love wasn't an emotion, but a daily decision, and the world called her Mother Teresa. That's who we are too. We're not just wars, waiting rooms, and unanswered notifications. We're makers of songs, planters of gardens, storytellers, caretakers of children, writers of letters that arrive 20 years late and still move the heart. We're capable of writing unforgettable books, of locking eyes with a stranger and feeling like we've known them forever, of hugging a friend with the strength of someone who's finally come home. That is who we are too. That's why this chapter isn't just here to speak of what hurts. It's here to remind you of what lights you up, of what makes you smile even when you don't know why, of what awakens your skin, your laughter, your internal music. Have you noticed there are people who turn the ordinary into art? The woman who dances while mopping the floor, the baker who decorates every vanilla shell as if it were the last, the young man who lets an elderly man cross the street in heavy traffic and smiles like he just saved the day. These acts don't make the news, but they are what holds humanity together. Light doesn't always come in beams. Sometimes it comes in spoonfuls of warm soup, in silences that hold you, in words that say little, yet say it all. I'm here. You're not lost. you can still come back to yourself. Because living isn't about climbing mountains every day. Sometimes, living is sitting on a park bench watching birds sing without asking permission. Sometimes it's staying quiet when speaking would only make things worse. Sometimes it's saying, "I'm sorry," without defense, without justification, without pride. Happiness can't be bought. It must be cultivated. And sometimes it grows where you least expect it. In a phrase your grandmother used to say when you didn't know why you were sad. In that moment when you stop scrolling and look up to see the sky, really see it. In the day you cook for yourself like you're your own favorite guest. That's what we're here for. To live as if we knew this chance is one of a kind. That this body, with its limits, its wrinkles, its awkwardness, is a miracle. That this life, even with its chaos, is a gift that didn't come gift-wrapped, but is bursting with possibilities. And do you know what happens when you begin to honor life that way? Love stops being something you search for. It becomes a mirror. Success stops being a goal. It becomes a state of soul. The shadow no longer frightens you because you see it as part of your balance. Like the dark earth, a seed needs to sprout. You didn't come here to obey fear. You came to discover the rhythm of your own heart, to make mistakes and still have the courage to love again. You came to share your voice, your laughter, your secret dance. You came to write your story in the ink of your own truth, even if your hand trembles, even if some don't read it, even if others criticize it. You came here to be, and that is already a form of light. There's a moment in life, only one, when you stop doing what's right and start doing what's real. It's not a grand moment. No one claps. There's no soundtrack. It's a quiet scene. You're standing in front of the mirror, stripped of expectations, no poses, no filter. And suddenly, instead of judging yourself, you understand. That's where it all begins. Life doesn't change when you reach a goal. It changes when you finally reach yourself. And it's curious, because what saves us is often not the loud, the obvious, the spectacular. Sometimes what saves us is a gesture so subtle it nearly goes unnoticed. A phrase you didn't know you needed to hear. A song that plays at the exact right moment. A person who doesn't leave. A stray dog who walks with you 3 blocks and makes you feel a little less alone. Light doesn't always come through the windows. Sometimes it slips in through the cracks. Do you remember the first time you thought you weren't enough? Maybe it was at school, when you didn't understand something and someone laughed. Maybe it was at home, when you were compared to your brother, your cousin, the neighbor's kid. Maybe it was in your first love when someone said you were too much or not emotional enough. And from there, you started editing yourself, shrinking, fitting in. But tell me, what happens when you stop editing yourself? What happens when you decide life is too short to live it halfway? What happens when instead of asking for permission, you give yourself space? Here's what happens. Your shadow stops being an enemy. It becomes an ally, because the shadow, when seen clearly, is proof that light exists. And if you learn to listen to it without fear, it will tell you things your bright side doesn't know. It shows you where it hurts, yes, but it also shows you where your dormant potential is waiting. Someone once said the shadow is God's back. What we can't see because we're too busy looking ahead, trying not to fall. But when you stop, when you breathe, when you turn around and retrace your steps, you discover that there is beauty even in what you tried to avoid. There is beauty in your story even in its most confusing parts. There is beauty in your wounds, not for the sake of romanticizing them, but because they helped you develop a different kind of skin, a more compassionate gaze, a more refined voice. There is beauty in your chaos, because chaos is not the enemy of order, it is its origin. The most beautiful gardens are born from the darkest soil. So when something inside you wants to give up, don't silence it. Listen to it, not to obey, but to understand. Because what often looks like weakness is simply a part of you that's tired of pretending to be strong. And when you learn to embrace that, something changes, not outside, inside. Do you know what the greatest act of courage is? It's not climbing mountains or giving everything up to start over. The greatest act of courage is looking yourself in the eye and saying, I see you, I accept you, just like this, with all of it. Because once you do that, you no longer need to convince anyone else. You're no longer afraid of rejection because you've stopped rejecting yourself. And then you live differently. You walk lighter. You speak your truth without hurting but without holding back. You walk away from relationships that offer only crumbs and open space for connections that nourish you. You replace I should with I want. And yes, of course there are losses, but there's also a new kind of gain, the peace of being in your own skin, without disguise. You didn't come here to live a tolerable life. You came to live a life that is truly yours, even if they say you're too much, even if some people walk away, even if your path becomes less crowded. The good news is, you're not alone. All around the world, people are waking up. People who've stopped chasing approval and started seeking truth. People who've made peace with their shadow and now walk with a gentler light. People who no longer need to convince because their very presence is transformation. You are one of them. And even if you still doubt, even if your hand still trembles, even if some days you want to hide again, remember this, you're already on the path. And that's all that matters. And then it happens. Not as a grand event. There are no lightning bolts or angelic choirs, just a different kind of sigh, one that comes from somewhere deeper, one that doesn't just let out air, but releases weight. It's as if your shadow, the one you've carried on your back for years, decided to sit beside you for a moment, not to fight, not to disrupt, but to talk. And the first thing it says is not a complaint. It's a confession. I wanted to be loved too. You didn't expect that. You always thought your dark side was there to ruin everything, to sabotage, to taint. But now you see it for what it really is, a part of you that went too long without being seen, without being heard, a part that cried silently while you tried to fit in, while you said yes when you wanted to say no, while you smiled in the mirror just to avoid disappointing anyone. And now that you finally see it, something aligns. Not magically, not overnight, but it begins. You start to realize that every flaw you tried so hard to hide has a story behind it, that your need to control was unspoken fear, that your pride was an elegant way of protecting a wound, that your anxiety wasn't a foe, it was a flare, that your anger wasn't evil, it was defense, and that your urge to give up was really a longing to start again, without the costume, without the weight, without all the noise. And there, right there, you understand that light is not the opposite of shadow. It is its translation. The shadow doesn't want to destroy you. It wants to be illuminated. It wants to be seen, not with judgment, but with curiosity. Not to be shut down, but to be understood. Not to be labeled, but to be listened to like a friend who has been quiet for far too long. There are people who spend their lives battling themselves, trying to change how they feel, how they love, how they think. They peel off layers as if they were mistakes. They amputate their authenticity out of fear of not being accepted. But living like that is like living in war with your own home, repainting it over and over without checking whether the walls need affection or just your attention. Peace doesn't come when everything outside aligns. It comes the moment you choose to stop running from what you feel. There comes a moment when you realize you don't need to have everything figured out to live with beauty. That your story, with all its cracks, holds a charm that cannot be manufactured. That your sensitivity is not a weakness, it's your finest radar. That your sadness, once it stops hiding, becomes water for something new. And that your joy, when it isn't forced, needs no explanation for its presence. Life doesn't reward those who pretend. Life blesses those who dare. Those who laugh when there's no reason. Those who embrace before forgiveness is even asked. Those who forgive themselves for not knowing better before. Those who let go of perfection and choose presence instead. And you are at that point. You've seen your shadow. You've lit your light. You've chosen to stay, even when it hurts, even when you don't yet know how the path will unfold, even when uncertainty makes noise. But still, you're here. And in this world of masks and haste, that alone is an act of revolution. So now, this is what you're called to do. Keep walking, not out of obligation, but out of desire. Keep speaking, not to persuade, but to share. Keep feeling, not to create drama, but to honor your humanity. And keep loving, not as a demand, but as a conscious choice. Because love is not about finding the perfect partner. It's about making your imperfection a livable space, and then, from that space, inviting someone in. No demands, no conditions, just the quiet beauty of what's real. There are people who will never be on magazine covers, who will never have millions of followers, who will never be featured in documentaries. But when you meet them, something inside you exhales, because they don't need to impress, because they've found their rhythm, because they're not trying to shine, they're simply being. And that's the hardest light to extinguish. The one that doesn't need a stage, the one that doesn't compete, the one that doesn't shout, the one that simply exists, and by existing, transforms. That light is already yours. You just had to remember. And now that you have, there's no turning back. Now it's your turn to light it in others. And that will always be the miracle. And then something happens that wasn't part of the plan. Something you can't see, but you can feel. It's not the end. It's a new beginning. The exact moment you realize you didn't come to this life to be perfect. You came to be real, to make mistakes with grace, to stumble with style, to cry with dignity, to love without asking for permission, to dance with your shadow and smile at the chaos. Because existence is not a straight line, it's a spiral. And with every turn, you return to the same place, but you are no longer the same. This is not a final chapter. It's a torch lit for when everything else goes dark. A flashlight in your pocket, a frameless mirror, a letter written by your soul and signed in ink made of presence. This chapter is not to be read. It is to be breathed. Because now you know the darkness was never your enemy. It was sacred ground, your emotional laboratory, your ruined house with a view of the sky, where great transformations are cooked, where wounds not only bleed, but bloom. You no longer look for quick answers. Now you prefer slow questions, the kind that don't rush, the kind that stay with you while you wash the dishes or cross the street, the kind that don't shout but also never leave, the kind that change you quietly, because you've understood that the soul doesn't evolve through logic. It evolves through courage, through tenderness, through honesty. And how do you live with that? You live lightly, with less mask and more skin, with less posing and more silence, with fewer artificial goals and more mornings with coffee and gratitude, with fewer self-help manuals and more honest conversations with yourself in the shower, with less fear of the shadow and more love for what the shadow came to show you. Because now you know that your light is not strongest when it shines. It's strongest when it doesn't need to prove anything, when it doesn't compete, when it doesn't convince, when it simply illuminates. For no reason other than that, it is its nature. Look around. Maybe nothing has changed, but you no longer look the same. That is the silent miracle. It doesn't feel like an ovation. It feels like a yes that rises from within, like a breath with no urgency, like a certainty that needs no argument, like the moment you realize you need nothing else to be yourself. And if one day you forget, because you will, remember this. You are enough when you are yourself, even when you don't know how to go on, even when your hands are trembling, even when all you can do is close your eyes and feel. That too is living. And in that moment, right there, you are shining. Not because of your achievements, not because of what others see. You shine because you are no longer hiding your cracks, because you've chosen to inhabit yourself completely, because you no longer run from your shadow. You invite it to dinner, you pour it a glass, and together you toast to everything that brought you here. This is not just another book. It's a declaration of freedom, of humanity, of imperfect beauty. It's a map with no fixed north, but with stars of your own, a hug in the shape of words, a quiet rebellion against the tyranny of who you're supposed to be, a celebration of who you already are, once you stop hiding it. And if ever you doubt, come back here, not to read, to remember that your darkness is divine too, that your vulnerability is also strength, that your story with all its pain is also someone else's medicine, and that your life, just as it is already a poem, one that doesn't need to rhyme, only to be true. Thank you for lighting this candle. Now, go out into the world and let your light speak for you.